Before we continue, understand this podcast is for adults only and refers to relationships and activities between adults which are voluntary and consensual. If you or anyone you know is being abused, coerced, or violently aggressed against, please reach out for help to the appropriate authorities. Listening to the Gorean Voice podcast. Each week I explore a topic from the Gorean novels which I personally find interesting, or an aspect of living a Gorean inspired, or Gorean adjacent lifestyle here on Earth. Tal, hello, and welcome. The Gorean Voice, episode 30. Philosophy impacted by dance. Greetings and welcome back to the Gorean Voice. Today's episode is going to start from what may seem like a strange angle. I'm going to be talking about dance, not as light entertainment, not as cultural ornament, but as a window into Gorean philosophy, and even deeper than that, as a revelation about human nature. The question I want to put on the table is this: in what ways does dance impact Gorean philosophy? And then I'll follow it with something unexpected. In what sense are humans sex reversed when it comes to dance? So let's dive in. Dance as philosophy embodied. One of the things I've said on this podcast before is that philosophy, if it's to mean anything, has to be lived. It cannot remain ink on paper. It cannot remain locked in the head. A Gorean philosophy without action, without flesh, or without ritual is empty. And that's where dance comes in. On Gor, the dances of the slave girl, the chain dance, the belly dance, the lure dance, the submission dance, they are not performed for their own sake. They are not shows. They are philosophy in motion. They are the philosophy of male dominance and female submission made flesh. When a girl dances, she is not just moving her body. She is yielding. She is surrendering. She is bearing herself before her master and before all men who watch. She is declaring with her flesh what cannot be fully captured with her words, that her nature is one of yielding and that her deepest power lies in her surrender. A philosopher may write this down. A poet may dress it in verses, but the girl dances it. And in her movements, philosophy is no longer abstract. It is embodied. It is felt. It lives. This is one of the greatest differences between the Gorean thought and much of what passes for philosophy here on Earth. Here, philosophy is often something sterile, academic, sealed up in books and universities. On Gor, philosophy is enacted. And in the dance, it is enacted in one of the purest, most direct ways possible. So, ordinarily, in the sort of natural order, men are the ones who act, and women respond. Men move, they fight, they hunt, they labor, they pursue. Well, you could say that is their dance. Women are more often the watchers, the nurturers, and the one who respond to male initiative. And in many other species, you'll notice it is the male who does the elaborate courtship dance, while the female will essentially respond positively if and only if the dance is satisfactory. But in dance with humans, something interesting happens. In dance, the roles reverse in a way. This is not a colorful male bird strutting his tail feathers. We instead see the woman strutting about. Suddenly it is the woman who moves, who acts, who takes initiative in a sense. For centuries now, whether one is out for a day at the races and a night at the opera, or one heads for a game of footy off to a public house, the men of class are dressed as so many black crows, while the women sport feathered hats and bright colors, precisely the opposite of the fancy cock and drab hen. Indeed, outside of extremely subtle accents such as pocket squares, cufflinks, watches, etc., it is gauche for a man to dress loudly, while in the same setting, it's perfectly appropriate for a woman to dress as a silent siren. She becomes the hunter, the warrior, the one who presses forward. Her weapons are not sword and shield, but beauty, grace, erotic surrender, and the intoxicating sight of her yielding flesh. And the man? He becomes the still one. He becomes the watcher. He is seated, silent, receiving and judging. For a brief time he is the audience, and he is acted upon. This is the reversal. For a moment, women act, and men respond. But here's the important point. This reversal does not undermine some natural order. It affirms it. Because even as the woman moves, she moves within the frame of yielding. Even as she acts, her action is surrender. Even as she captures attention, she is only capturing it in order to give herself away. Also, it's worth noting that in social settings where women dress provocatively and the men all dress in black, they do so within an environment of security that is established by those men and their compatriots. They don't do so in a vacuum. So such a display has several antecedents in order for it to be freely indulged in. So this reversal is not an inversion of power, but it is something of a paradox. The paradox is that in being placed at the center of attention, the girl does not gain power, but rather magnifies her vulnerability. She is more exposed, more open, more judged than ever before. And yet, through that exposure, she exercises her most feminine power, the power of beauty in yielding. So dance becomes the stage upon which the natural order can be dramatized in this strange, paradoxical way, men watching, women moving, but in the end, women yielding and men commanding. In our earthly cultures, dance itself never seems to me more than a few steps away from a more intimate union, as with other animals. Even the more choreographed and formalized forms of dance, which accompany music videos or sports cheering, have a magnetism that draws upon the desire for human connection. Dance itself is beautifully impractical, a labor-intensive way to move from A to B, yet it is so much more graceful than simply walking forward and embracing the objects of one desire. Consider something from the more vulgar end of contemporary human culture. Modern exotic dance, as practiced in the seedy gentlemen's bars and seedier strip clubs throughout the world. The pole dance, chair dance, and other well-known rituals, which piggyback on male desire, are so well known in general that they are now taught in pole dance-oriented fitness classes, with nary a lusty male eyeball in sight. Yet, when performed in the club setting, they are accompanied by impractical sexualized footwear, and the woman's hair is generally worn loose in all its glory, at once a display of fertility, vulnerability, and surrender, regardless of whether she's looking up or down at her male audience. Dance for your supper, girl, and you may share my bed with me instead of sharing the moat with my crocodiles. Consider a much more tame and classy example in our modern world, the ballet bun. Ballet is itself an extremely demanding activity. I'd rank it somewhere between gymnastics and wrestling in terms of its athletic difficulty. And yet, ballerinas are trained not only to accomplish these feats of strength and agility, but to do so gracefully, with poise and with a smile, and without the slightest indication that their old ankle injury is acting up again. They are to act, or rather to exist, intentionally in beautiful tension. Enter the ballet bun. With all of the dynamic movements, inversions, etc., long flowing hair is impractical to say the least. Yet so very few of the women who push through the pain to cultivate such beauty in their movements and postures are willing to chop off their locks. The next simplest solution is, of course, some simple cap, wrap, bandana or turban-type garment to hold all of that beautiful hair in place. But that won't do either. Instead, a hairstyling technique has developed which keeps the long, silky locks of the dancer stowed neatly in a bun, but on display all the time. That's because we humans, and most especially women and girls, don't do anything for ourselves alone, and the dance itself is a prelude to something else. For women, a loving reunion is to be hoped for, and for young girls, perhaps an ice cream with dad, but we all dance for our people. The implications from modern Gorean living. Now, what does this mean for us here on Earth in modern households that attempt to live some flavor of Gorean? First of all, it means that dance is not trivial. It's not just for entertainment. It's a form of ritual, a form of training, and a form of philosophical expression. In some households, literal slave dance is present, choreographed or improvised expressions of submission. In others, the practice may not be formalized, but the principle still stands. Movement matters. The body matters. Posture, gesture, grace, all of it communicates philosophy. A girl's kneeling posture, the way she serves drink, the way she enters a room, all of this is, in its own way, a dance, and all of it, whether clumsy or graceful, expresses philosophy. The books allude to a great deal of off-page detail in the dance-like postures and maneuvers that Kajirai are formally taught in the course of their training and indoctrination. In Book 5, Tarl, the protagonist, even mocks his companion, Elizabeth, when she explains that she is being trained in some 50 different beautiful ways to enter a room. When he suggests she could, simply walk on in, she exclaims that there are now 51. Here on the Earth side, I recently attended an immersive theatrical performance. The actress who portrayed the vampy, vaguely Eastern European, widowed owner of the last tavern in town on a dark and stormy night embodied a fashion of this. She was ever in character, and she never simply walked. She glided sylph-wise, always wearing an expression of intrigue, disdain, or wary curiosity, and never letting her opera gloves crumple in the slightest, regardless of what or who she ran her fingers upon. Now, I referred above to a theatrical performance, and while I don't want Kajira or Master, for that matter, to be so concerned with appearances that they are subject to stage fright in the privacy of their own living room, it's worthwhile to remember that we only live once, and we may as well live with beauty and elegance, or with power and leonine grace, as the case may be, rather than simply getting through the day and collapsing onto a sofa with the minimal requirements having been met. So if you are a master, you might ask yourself, how is my slave embodying her submission in movement? And if you are a slave girl listening to this, you might ask, am I embodying my philosophy with my whole body, or only with my words, or certain of my gestures? The lesson of dance is that submission must be embodied, not only spoken. Philosophy must be lived, not only taught. Dance shows us that philosophy is not confined to the written word. It is enacted, it is lived, it is revealed in flesh, in ritual, and in surrender. Now, before we leave the subject of dance entirely, I should mention that it also has a life outside the books, which is also outside the flesh, in online Gorean roleplay communities. You may notice that if you search the web for Gorean Dance, or Gorean Slave Dance, or Gorean Kajira Dance, or Gorean Chain Dance, etc., some large measure of the results are not flesh and blood women undulating about in nominally Near Eastern costume, but rather appear to be video game characters. So what the heck is going on there? As it turns out, and which you may be either disappointed or delighted to learn, depending on your taste, there is a major Gorean presence in certain online environments. In those digital spaces, whether in old IRC chat rooms, forums, or visually immersive worlds like Second Life, the slave girls dance becomes a ritual performed through text. Instead of hips and hands and eyes, it is typed out keystroke by keystroke. Long, elaborate descriptions of movement, mood, and surrender. A girl may write for pages, describing the ringing of her ankle chain and the swaying of her hair and the tremor in her voice. This practice appears to have its own subculture. Some masters apparently judge these dances in contests. Some online communities use them to train or to bond or to measure a girl's creativity or depth of submission. In that sense, it is not so different from the living Gorean household, where a dance is both expression and proof. However, I regard the concept of dancing by way of one's keyboard as the pinnacle of inauthenticity, although I also recognize that for many people, this is their only window into a Gorean life. Not everyone is ready or able to live it in the flesh. For some, this digital ritual is the closest they come to expressing what they feel is most true about them. So while I don't mock it, I would never confuse it with the reality of flesh and breath and sweat. I can at least acknowledge that the very persistence of dance, even in a form as mediated as text, testifies to its importance. The philosophy insists on being embodied somehow, even if the body in question is reduced to words on a screen. I'll leave you with this question. Where in your own life are you embodying philosophy, and where are you still keeping it locked away in books and words? For my own part, there isn't nearly enough dance in my life, and I haven't cultivated this facet deeply enough in the woman I love, despite her natural aptitude and interest in it. Well, thanks for joining me again this morning. Lads, it's never too late to make some of your shoes into dancing shoes. If you're a late bloomer, it's unlikely that you'll be getting callbacks from the Royal Winnipeg Ballet or your country's premier dance company. However, between I don't dance and ballet soloist, there's quite a bit of room to maneuver. A simple class for adults is a great way to meet people, or if that's out of the question, taking the time and setting up a bit of space to move your body to some music, even with only squirrels as your audience, is a great way to get in touch with your body in a whole new way and develop some of that power and leonine grace that we're looking for. Lasses, is your inner dancer yet struggling to be born? Or has she retreated from your life as school, work, motherhood, or other of life's concerns scared her away? Bring her back, little by little. Not too fast, though. She may not be acquainted with your body's limitations, recently acquired. In a future episode, I'll be revealing the answers to several polls I've conducted about which of the Gore novels one could do without, or even erase from history. However, pray join me again next week, when I'll look at the matter of identity again. How do you identify? In the meantime, fair winds and happy trails.